This is the Master Brewers Podcast, brought to you by the Master Brewers Association of the Americas, a volunteer organization dedicated to continually improving the products and processes of our membership since 1887.
Let's go!
Master Brewers brings you interviews with the industry's best and brightest in brewing science, technology, and operations.
Calm down, I'm moving too fast.
This Master Brewers podcast is proudly sponsored by Hopsteiner, a global leader in the hop industry focused on quality, sustainability, and innovation in new hop varieties and hop products. Contact our brewery sales team to provide you with the hop-related tools you need to craft your next great beer. For more information, visit hopsteiner.com.
Additional support provided by
Get to know Proximity Malt. We malt superior, European-style, low-protein varieties grown close to home in Delaware and Colorado. Domestically grown, precisely malted to style. With our team of seasoned experts and 2 brand-new malt houses, try what's really new in malt. Check us out at www.proximitymalt.com.
I blacked out at that point, thankfully. I woke up in shock trauma.
I'm hoping if by December, if I'm walking normally, I'll be really happy.
To my knowledge, we've had 3 dry hopping geyser or volcano incidents here in Ninkasi.
I had some microfractures in orbital bone and laceration on my knee and broken wrist.
Yeah, we changed a lot of things after that happened.
We need to rethink our systems here. Like, there's no way we can have this dangerous of a system going on a day-to-day basis for our team members.
This week on the show, Dry Hop Geyser survivors talk about their experiences and how you can avoid repeating their dangerous mistakes.
Hello, my name is Jessica Young, and I'm with Bearded Iris Brewing in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm Daniel Sharp, Director of Brewing Operations at Ninkasi Brewing Company in Eugene, Oregon.
Hi, my name is Victor Rini, and I'm with Key Brewing Company out of Baltimore, Maryland.
I'm Lee Lannis with Kindred Spirit Brewing here in Goochland, Virginia.
My name is George DePiro. I'm the Chief Brewing Officer with Druthers Brewing Company in Albany, Schenectady, and Saratoga Springs, New York.
Hi, my name is Cody Green. I'm the Environmental Health and Safety Manager for Founders Brewing.
Jessica, you're doing a lot of dry hopping during active fermentation down in Nashville. Tell us about your process.
Sure. So we typically dry hop right during the beginning of fermentation. It's usually about day 2 or 3. We go on attenuation percentage, so it's between the range of 55 to 65%. So it's still extremely active, which can be a little scary.
I believe you said you were also adding some fruit at the same time. Is that right?
Yes. So we make fruited milkshake IPAs, and of course that involves large quantities of fruit. And I like to make sure that the fruit ferments out, so we want to throw it in during fermentation as well, and that would happen at the same time as the dry hop.
Got it.
And it's usually in pretty large quantities as well, so it can be a little bit messy if that decides to explode.
What's give us some scope here. What size are your tanks, and like what kind of pounds per barrel or whatever metric you want to use?
We usually do, we have 30s, 60s, and 120s. We usually try and keep the milkshake IPAs in the 30 barrel tanks. We're adding about a pallet of fruit, which I'm not sure what that equates to barrel wise. But it's, I think it's over like 180 gallons in a 30 barrel tank. So it's a pretty large quantity.
And how about hops? Are you just adding pellets, or are you doing something different?
We usually add pellets. That range is pretty variable depending on the beer. It can go anywhere from 2 pounds up to like 5 pounds per barrel.
And I'll ask what may be a stupid question. What is the difference between what is a milkshake IPA? Is it the same thing as a New England IPA, or is it something different?
It's pretty similar, except in the sense that it is usually has lactose added in the boil. So that's the milk portion, I suppose. and then it would be the fruit portion of it.
Got it. You can tell I'm really up on all the current trends here. Okay. All right. So, okay. Well, let's. And are you adding all this on a ladder, or how are you doing it?
We used to use the ladder on the 30 barrel pretty often, but since we got the 60s and the 120s, we've gotten a lift now, and that's aided a lot in the not picking up heavy boxes and taking them up to the top of the tank.
So is that like a scissor lift, or is that something different?
Yeah, it's a scissor lift.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And you've had a couple of geysers during the last year. Talk about those incidents.
Yes, we specifically on some of our 30 barrel tanks only have one blow off arm that is also the CIP arm. And so unfortunately, there was an instance we were doing one of the milkshake IPAs, and they added the hops, and then they started to begin to add the fruit. And then they saw that it was going to be a little bit vigorous, and so they decided to cap the tank, and they left the blow-off arm open. But unfortunately, the CIP ball got clogged, and they didn't realize it during the expelling of the CO2 that the CIP ball got clogged. And then a team member went back up to the top of the tank and took the cap off, which flew off past his face, and then a lot of beer came out of the top of the tank, exploding all over the place. So after that incident specifically, with the danger of the cap flying off past someone's face, made us say we need to rethink our systems here. Like, there's no way we can have this dangerous of a system going on a day-to-day basis for our team members.
What's the difference? Why do you think you experienced geysers on those two tanks, but not on presumably the many others that you've dry hopped in the past?
Well, sometimes it's with that large of a range, like the 55 to 65. Sometimes they kind of go a little bit earlier when it's still like pretty vigorous, or maybe there's more CO2 in solution at the time, or maybe sometimes there can be like little hop islands, and so the hops don't actually sink down initially, and sometimes they take a few minutes to sink down, or maybe they finish by the time it decides to sink down and then nucleate all that CO2. I guess it's kind of a variety of factors that kind of depend on like what's going on with the beer, but sometimes it's just different for every tank, and usually it's definitely a lot worse the earlier the attenuation is, or the lower the attenuation is. You
mentioned that those tanks don't have a separate blow-off, that the CIP arm is the blow-off. Do you have other tanks that have a separate arm, and if so, is the problem mitigated by that or not? Yeah, most of our tanks have a separate blow-off arm, and those typically do not get clogged at all. It's usually just those CIP arms that the ball themselves that gets clogged. And it's usually with the fruit material. Some of it is very pulpy, and sometimes it can be hop material. And even if you take apart your PRVs later, you can see hop material in those too. Got it. Okay, so you've made some changes to your process in an effort to mitigate risk. Tell us what you're doing differently now.
Absolutely. So I think the first thing that is most important is training on just exactly what's going to happen when a hop geyser or volcano is going to happen. And that includes like being able to pick out exactly what things are starting to happen if you're up there, which usually the best indicator I've seen is if you're up on a tank and you're seeing a lot of hop dust come out, which is, there will always be some hop dust coming out because there's always positive pressure in that. But if it's coming out about 3 or 4 inches above the hop port, then you're probably getting close to an explosion. The second thing is you should always check the foam and the level in the tank, and then note it when it starts to rise up a little bit, and constantly be watching that after you add each addition of hops. The second thing that's probably the most valuable for like team member confidence and safety is we've bought 4-inch and 6-inch valves, and we add that to the tank right at the beginning of the dry hop. The valves allow them to, even if they can't tell the difference of it starting to get on the verge of having a hop volcano, they'll be able to very quickly close it and not have to deal with the scenario of trying to get a cap and a gasket and a tri-clamp on and fighting the pressure and all the scary things that can come with that. So the valves are probably the thing that added the most amount of confidence and safety in our team and for me and my team. We always dry hop with 2 people. There's always someone down at the blow-off arm. And granted, the CO2 is going to want to escape through the largest port, which is the dry hop port. But hopefully if there's someone on the ground also double checking, if they feel a little bit of a pickup, maybe they can tell the person on the lift to go ahead and, close it up. I think that we're getting close to an explosion. And then if we are ever dry hopping the tanks that only have the CIP arm, we make sure that we add 3 psi of pressure to the tank to make sure that we clear whatever is in that could have potentially clogged the CIP ball. And then we allow it to completely relieve back down to 0 and make sure it relieves smoothly and nothing has continued to clog the ball. And then that basically ensures that all the pressure is off the tank and they're safe to reopen that valve.
Lee, I ran into you a few months ago at the Virginia Craft Brewers Guild event and was surprised to see your leg was immobilized with some sort of massive cast and or brace contraption. What happened?
Yeah, so that I actually fell off a ladder with a geyser that happened. I was dry hopping one of our beers and I felt it coming on and tried to put the cap and gasket and dry clamp on, and by the time I was done that, it blew off and just started soaking me. And as I was trying to come down the ladder, I slipped off the ladder and fell, broke my heel bone. Luckily, it wasn't real bad. I mean, I didn't have to have surgery, so that was the only saving grace about it. But yeah, we changed a lot of things after that happened.
Wow. Okay. Well, let's hear about those changes.
So we have a system that I can brew on, and I can fill up one of our big tanks. We usually do 4 brews in a day, and we actually dropped off one of the brews to make it less in the tank. We don't use a ladder anymore. We bought it's like a cage kind of thing that you can put on the forks and forklift somebody up to that position, so they don't have to worry about a ladder. And also, before we dry hop, because we do it during fermentation also, we'll put CO2 onto the racking arm with it pointing upwards, and we'll put CO2 through the tank to dissipate any CO2 bubbles before we dry hop. And that's pretty much what we've done to hopefully mitigate any issues.
So far, so good?
So far, so good. Yeah, I got a dry hop today, so.
Cool. How's your recovery going?
It's better now. I'm actually fully walking, but I still have a little bit of a limp. I'm hoping if by December, if I'm walking normally, I'll be really happy.
Wow. Well, sorry that happened to you, and wish you a speedy recovery for the rest of that process. Victor, you weren't dry hopping when it happened, but you did experience a bad fall in the brewery 7 years ago. Tell us what happened.
So it was basically during CIP. We had run our initial caustic cycle, and protocol was pop open the tank, take our flashlight. This is 50-barrel tanks, and we would just look in and do a visual inspection, check any of the shadow areas, and we saw that the spray ball had been gummed up during the CIP. So it was grab the ladder and jump up there, pull the spray ball, scrub it off, continue on the day. So I grabbed the ladder. I had someone holding the ladder for me. As I got up to the top of the tank, I was not tied off, not anything. I'm at 15, 20 feet up at this point, and I was banging the spray ball, trying to knock it loose because it had a pretty good feel at that point. And as I was knocking it and rocking it back and forth, all of a sudden it pulled, and that was enough to cause me to lose my balance, and I blacked out at that point. Thankfully, I woke up in shock trauma.
Wow.
Fortunately, that was precautionary. I had made an attempt. I had come to learn that I made an attempt to arrest my fall by grabbing some of the pipe work and glycol lines as I fell off the backside of the tank. And I made it out pretty unscathed in that I had some microfractures in orbital bone and laceration on my knee and broken wrist. But like I said, the best part about all of that was I didn't know any of it. I woke up in the hospital because it was certainly scary waking up in the hospital. But yeah, it could have been way worse. So I'm thankful that I'm here on this call.
Wow, that's something else. Were any corrective actions put into place to prevent similar accidents from happening in the future?
Definitely. So right away, no more ladders. That was not something that brewery was going to do any longer. It was going to be the man basket with the forklift, or we also had a boom lift that you could then be harnessed in and tied off and get to anything that you needed to be. Unfortunately, this was one of those situations where crisis precipitates change, and unfortunately, I was the crisis that precipitated that change.
Coming up.
So I wanted a way to add things to the tank while maintaining pressure, because that's really the key, is don't depressurize the tank and you're not going to have a geyser.
I'm John Bryce, and you're listening to the Master Brewers podcast from the Master Brewers Association of the Americas. Support for this podcast is brought to you by
ABS Commercial is a full-service brewery and parts outfitter. From our Raleigh headquarters to our Denver office, we proudly offer brew houses and fermenters from 3 barrels and up, yeast brinks, boilers, kegs, chillers, tri-clamp, and other stainless parts, all with the quickest delivery and lead times in the industry. Learn more at abs-commercial.com or call 877-BREW-ABS. ABS Commercial. We are brewers.
additional support provided by
Bring the world to your brewhouse with BSG's diverse selection of ingredients and services. Our dedicated customer service team and industry experience provides you with the assistance you need every step of the way. Make BSG your supplier of choice with products essential to making great artisanal beverages so you can stay focused on your craft. Visit us at bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact us at 1-800-374-2739.
Here's what's coming up on the Master Brewers calendar. District Pittsburgh meets October 15th. District Michigan meets at Arbor Brewing October 17th. District St. Louis meets October 17th. And the brand new District Georgia is holding its first annual pig roast October 19th at Monday Night Brewing in Atlanta. District Mid-Atlantic meets October 19th at Union Craft Brewing in Baltimore. Registration is now open for the 2019 Master Brewers Conference in Calgary. Be sure to tack on a couple of extra days to enjoy some amazing hiking and make the 45-minute trip to Banff, which is one of the most picturesque places on the planet. And immediately following the conference is the world-famous Master Brewers 2-week Brewing and Malting Science course in Madison, Wisconsin. Check out the full calendar of events at mbaa.com for more details or to find a district meeting near you. Now back to the show. George, after experiencing a couple of dry hop geysers, you had a dry hop dosing device fabricated. Tell us about that.
Yes. At first, I've got to say, listening to the previous guests' experiences of falling off ladders, I'm kind of really grateful that that never happened to me, because I spent 13 years at a brew pub with top manways on the tanks. No bottom manways. It was only top manways. So everything was done on a ladder. And I somehow never fell. But boy, that is scary. So after I got wet the second time, I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I like to ferment my beers. I like to carbonate them naturally. So I'm dry hopping beers that are at about 2 to 2.1 volumes of CO2 when they're ales, and lagers will end up being fully carbonated to like 2.4 volumes. So I wanted a way to add things to the tank while maintaining pressure, because that's really the key, is don't depressurize the tank and you're not going to have a geyser. So I just had a 6-inch pipe welded to a 6-inch to 4-inch reducer, and then had a cap put on it. And that fits on top of a 4-inch butterfly valve at the top of the fermenter. So you attach this, you pour in whatever you want to pour in, hops, fruit, whatever, and put a cap on it, open the valve, the pressure equalizes, and the stuff falls in. It's that easy. And then you close the valve, open a little ball valve that's on the cap of the device, and depressurize it. And then you can either add more stuff if you couldn't get it all in one dose, or you remove the device and clean everything up.
That's pretty cool. And these are somewhat widely available now, but I believe you mentioned that this was sort of a prototype at the time, right?
Yeah, I had my brew house vendor build it for me, and then I guess I should have patented it, because maybe I'd not be brewing anymore. But it's just such a simple device, and yes, now it's available online. Can I say the name of the company that's making them?
In fact, we'll put some links in the show notes to that company and also some of the others, so that if anyone wants to get one, they'll at least have a few options out there. So sure.
Right. Okay. JV Northwest are the people who made my prototype, actually. And then Mark's Design and Metalworks have one available for a very reasonable price on their website.
All right, great. And just a couple other little things. Do you want to talk a little bit about how much it holds, how much it weighs, things like that?
Yeah, well, it depends. It depends on how much ceiling space you've got and how much money you're willing to spend. Because if you have one custom made, the diameter of the pipe is going to determine, the diameter of the pipe and the length of the pipe are going to determine how much it holds. So we have some ceiling height restrictions at our largest brewery where we have 60 barrel fermenters. So the device I have here will hold about 8 pounds, maybe 10 pounds of hop pellets. So it takes us multiple doses to dry hop one of these tanks. But at our locations with smaller brewing systems, they can have 7 to 8 pounds in their dosing devices, and that's usually enough for dry hopping one batch.
Sounds good. Well, you can just call it double or triple dry hopped, if you need to, and then sell more beer. So.
Right, if you have to keep adding more. And I've got to say, working on ladders is a terrible idea. And if you have the space for it, because I know not every small brew pub has the space for a scissor lift, but boy, they are so much safer for doing everything. And also, listening to the other guests made me realize we do something here routinely. We remove the CIP balls from tanks that have any chance at all of crawling up that high. So if we're doing a full 60 barrel batch in one of our 60 barrel fermenters, we will remove the CIP spray ball so that it cannot get clogged.
Daniel, welcome back to the show again. You're with one of the nation's larger craft breweries, producing somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 barrels. The bigger the brewery, the more impressive the dry hop geyser, right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so you guys have done some investigations into a couple of dry hop geyser incidences, or maybe more than a couple, and also some RCAs, which I wasn't sure if that stands for root cause analysis or risk control assessment, but regardless, you've ended up in a place where you've got some countermeasures. So let's hear your story.
Yeah, so actually, to my knowledge, we've had 3 dry hopping geyser or volcano incidents here in Ninkasi. 2 of them happened while I was here, and the first one that was recorded happened before I was here. And kind of the big takeaway that we've come across looking back on these and doing, as you mentioned, RCAs, or we call them root cause analysis, but I think a risk control assessment is also an adequate label for those, is really controlling the amount of pressure and headspace in a tank. We found that really anything under 25%, less than 25% headspace in a vessel, you're really setting yourself up for not having enough room in the tank for any sort of breakout that will occur, and then also having tight control over the amount of carbon dioxide that's entrained or dissolved in the beer itself, or the fermenting beer, when you go to add those dry hops. So it may be high at first, but you got to get it down to a certain amount before adding your dry hops that will then add nucleation sites and obviously geyser if it's too high.
What is that spec at Ninkasi, do you know?
We don't have a hard spec on it, but it's trying to get as much out as you can. And so one of the previous people on the call mentioned trying to recirculate or get some breakout to occur initially. We've tried a few different ways. One is recirculating the tank and also bubbling up a little CO2 while the tank isn't closed up, doesn't have any caps, so to speak. And then also, but doing that in a gentle way, because you can easily get some geysering to happen while you're doing that as well. I will say from our standpoint, we're a larger brewery, so our smallest tanks are 240 barrel tanks, probably looking at around 40 to 50 feet tall. And so everything has to be accessed either by a ladder or by our dry hop catwalk. So our employees are on top of the tanks. And as previous people on the call also mentioned, really working from ladders is not to be done. Try and have some sort of secure place that you can anchor to mitigate any sort of fall hazard whatsoever. We also have put in some safety measures in terms of having spotters on the ground to kind of help monitor the blow off on the tanks or the CO2 that's being released. We have on all of our tanks, we have at least 2, if not 3 ways to relieve pressure on the tank, either through the vent arm. We also have a dry hopping port where we add the hops into, and then the vacuum release valve that is a little bit bigger of a port that we kind of prop open as well to keep the CO2 flowing, so to speak, and not get it corked up in there in the tank and then create a high pressure situation.
All right, very good. Cody, you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Great. I believe you have a message for us from the Master Brewers Brewery Safety Committee.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of elaborate on some of the things that were said there. First of all, I just want to, I'm glad to hear that Lee and Victor were okay, listening to those stories too, and some of the other commentary that people have made. When they're on top of ladders and tanks and things like that, usually when it goes wrong, it's due to some external force or bodily reaction, whether it's from a dry hop geyser or from removing a component that suddenly gives away. And so, it's really, really important that as you set up whatever method you choose to get on top of a tank or access an elevated area, that you have it set up properly and that you account for something like that could go wrong. So if we're looking at specifically on ladders, the first thing that we really want to do is make sure that we have the right selection. And I was thankful to hear that Jessica and Lee both had alternatives to ladders. Ladders are super accessible. They're relatively cheap, and a lot of times people just go to those first. If you have an application where you have the headspace and you have the means to either get a scissors lift or some alternative platform, that's going to be the best situation there. That really should be an afterthought if you're going to use a ladder. So if you do have a situation where you do have to set up a ladder, the first thing is really just to make sure you have the correct type. So in some of our cellars, we have, in some of our older cellars, we have a little bit shorter tanks that are still accessed by ladders. We just don't have the headspace for a lift or anything like that. But a couple pointers there. Always use fiberglass. We don't use anything conductive, so try to avoid any aluminum ladders, anything like that. As far as wood ladders, those shouldn't be involved in a food facility anyway. So really, fiberglass is going to be best. And then either an A-frame ladder is going to be great, or we've actually recently went to podium ladders. A little bit different design where our operators are actually able to stand on like a 1 foot by 2 foot platform. They're much more stable. It allows them to lean against the side rails of the ladder a little bit more, allows them to pull, coffee sacks or, carry up, bags of hops a lot easier and kind of work a little bit harder up there with a little bit more security. So that's the number one thing, is just making sure you have the correct type of ladder for that application.
If you are on a ladder, is there any sort of recommendation about any way to hook into the top of the tank once you're up there, or anything like that?
From a regulatory point of view, that's not required. From a best practice, it may be good. The only thing I would recommend there is that if you're tying off, it really should be to limit that that force from moving backwards. So like if you were to have that bodily reaction from pulling a spray ball out or something like that, you're only going to fall back just a little bit, where you're not going to actually topple off the ladder. If you're looking at like an engineered fall protection anchor point, a lot of times those are difficult to tie into on the top of a tank. That it can be done, but that is something that you can look at. I would just proceed with caution there.
Okay. Great. Anything else you'd like to add?
One thing just kind of specific to the brewery operations too is, we use, like I mentioned, A-frame ladders quite a bit. Obviously inspecting those carefully to make sure they're in good shape, but setup is really important, especially in a brewery too, because, your floors are going to be sloped. And so making sure that ladder is set up appropriately, so you're not, the slope of the floor is not, leaning that ladder off to one side. So just making sure that's oriented correctly, and then also drain covers. So our drains are pretty deep in some spots. We routinely remove those drain covers to make sure the drains are cleaned inside and out. Just making sure those are set up and secured properly. The last thing you'd want is to have one of those legs from the A-frame ladder to fall inside an open drain cover. That's gonna bring you down really quickly. So just kind of making sure your work area is set up properly is going to be your best bet.
That was Jessica Young, Victor Arini, Lee Lannis, George DePiro, Daniel Sharp, and Cody Green here on the Master Brewers podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to tons of Master Brewers brewery safety resources, which are 100% free and accessible to both members and non-members, as well as links to some of the dry hop devices George mentioned, and the schedule for the Master Brewers podcast live event coming up in Calgary. I'll be talking yeast with Graham Stewart, dry hopping with Tom Shellhammer, Kvike yeast with Richard Priest, oxygen ingress on small canning lines with Brooke Bell, diastaticus detection with Matt Linsky, and so much more. Master Brewers Live is a brand new addition to the 2019 Master Brewers Conference, so grab your passport, get registered at mbaa.com, and join us in the Master Brewers Live studio October 31st and November 1st in Calgary. Check out the brand new Master Brewers podcast website. You'll find guest profiles, information about upcoming live events, and more, all at masterbrewerspodcast.com. Are you enjoying the Master Brewers podcast? Let me tell you about a simple way you can help us keep making more. Take a minute to thank our sponsors. There's no way we could produce this show without generous support from sponsors like Hopsteiner, ABS, Proximity Malt, and BSG. So please, let them know you heard their message on the Master Brewers podcast and that you appreciate their support.